Go ahead and open your Bibles to John chapter 10. That's where we're going to be this morning. John chapter 10. I am thrilled with the steering committee that they chose the Gospel of John. And I think it's a genius way that they've done it this weekend of different ways to study it. And I've been assigned the chapter of John chapter 10. And we'll be there in just a moment if you'll go ahead and keep your Bibles open to that chapter. When we get to John chapter 10, it seems like day by day, hour by hour, even moment by moment, Jesus is battling the Pharisees. He is gaining popularity with the people, and the Pharisees hate that, and he is gaining the trust of the people, and the Pharisees despise that. And so when we get to John chapter 10, the tension level between Jesus and the Pharisees is really growing. I thought the observation that Jeremy made this morning in the keynote was brilliant when he said John chapters 1 through 12 is really, the first 3 years of Jesus' ministry. 13 through 20 is the last week. And Jeremy's exactly right about that. So when we get to John chapter 10, it would only make sense that we're well into year number 3. So tension has been building over and over and over again. And if you look at verses 7 through 9, Jesus doesn't help the tension because the Pharisees are there and the Pharisees are listening. And he says, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. That's one of the 7 I am statements in the Gospel of John. I am the gate for the sheep. In other words, I am the only way to God. People come through me, people go out from me, but I'm the gate, I'm the door. They're not getting there without me. And he'll use another I am statement in John 14 when he says, I am the way and I'm the truth and I'm the life. It's a very similar statement. But he doesn't just say, I'm the only way to God here in John chapter 10, verse 7. Here's what he says in verse 8. He says, the people who came before me, they were thieves, they were robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. And so we wonder for a second, well, who are the thieves, who are the robbers that he's talking about? It's not Moses, it's not Elijah, it's not John the Baptist, because the people listened to all 3 of those guys, and they respected those guys. We begin to realize that the thieves and robbers that Jesus is talking about are the people right in the room with him. If Jesus were standing here and his audience was sitting where you were sitting, he would say, there's a bunch of thieves and robbers, not to mention any names, but it's all of y'all right in front of me. And they already don't like him. So this is not a good icebreaker. This is not a good way to win them back over by calling them thieves and robbers. And if I understand John chapter 10 correctly and kind of get his tone, he's really upset because in John 9, the same day, he heals this man who's been born blind, and they ask him a bunch of questions about who healed him and why they healed him. But in verse 35, Jesus hears that they've thrown this guy out. They've taken him out of their fellowship, and he comes up to him and says, well, you've been cast out. Do you believe that I am the Son of Man? They have that conversation. But this is the same day that they get rid of this guy that he has just healed, who's lived with blindness his entire life. And Jesus says, all of those who came before me, they're thieves and they're robbers. Their intentions are not true. They're not real. They're not sincere. And we just see the tension barometer going up and up and up and up. And then in verse 10, Jesus takes the cherry and he puts it on top of this tension sundae, the icing on the cake. And Jesus says what we're going to talk about right now. If someone can get that to come back up, I don't know what happened. We don't have to have it. Can somebody press that key? He says, the thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. But I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. First he tells them, you're a bunch of thieves and robbers. And then he says, I've come to give people what really matters. Abundant life is what we often call it. He says everyone else in the room, if you want to borrow that metaphor, everyone else in the room, they are not sincere, they're selfish, they have the wrong motives. But not me. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. That's what this class is about, is the abundant life. We've heard about the abundant life for years. I'm sure you grew up in the church hearing about the abundant life. It's one of the best promises of Jesus, but sometimes I wonder, do we even know what he's talking about when he talks about the abundant life? I mean, what is that? If you were going to go home today after this conference was over and pull your children up to your dinner table while you're eating dinner and say, children, I want to explain to you what the abundant life is, what would you tell them? If you were going to talk with your coworker at lunch, during your lunch break, by the water fountain, or sitting around the table as you eat your sandwich from home, hey, let me explain to you what the abundant life is. What would you tell them? I mean, what is it? We know it entails forgiveness of sin, and we know that it entails life with Jesus, and we know that heaven's got to work into this one way or another. But today, what is the abundant life in your life right now? That can be a difficult question to answer. And so, well, I don't want you to take the class, but go ahead. I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Helping people. Certainly part of it. Certainly part of it.
Go around not helping somebody.
That is certainly part of it. That's a great answer. Helping people, having a servant heart, looking outside yourself. I want to offer 3 things today, and helping people is going to definitely work into this, but 3 things, 3 mindsets that I believe if we live with these mindsets, if we live with these visions, I think it's going to change the way that we live. And I certainly think it'll change the way that the church acts in the communities in which we reside. So here are 3 different things to think about when you think about the abundant life. First one is, with the abundant life, we are blessed to be people who live with nothing to prove. You get to live with nothing to prove. If you haven't noticed, you need to check your pulse to make sure you're still with us. But we live in a self-absorbed culture. We live in a culture that is completely obsessed with our personal image. We all have one of these, iPhone, smartphone, whatever it is. We've got 3 boys in our house. We've got a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And we were talking with our 7-year-old the other day about phones, and he was shocked to hear that one day, long ago, these didn't have cameras. All you used these for was to call people. You know, his entire life, we've had a phone that could take pictures. And because of that, we have created a culture that is so self-absorbed. You hold out the phone, you take the selfie, you give it the hashtag, you post it on the internet, and you let people into the deep secrets of your life. And if it's not the selfie conversation, it's the stuff conversation. It's how big of a house we have, how nice of a car we drive, or how much money we make, or how many stock options we own, or if we're really successful, we don't just have one nice house, we got another nice house. We got a lake house. We got a deer lease. We got something else. And our world says if you don't have all of those things, you're a failure. And that is an exhausting way to live, because how our world lives and how our world thinks is I have to prove myself to other people by the things that I have, things that don't have any value, things that aren't sentimental, things that really don't matter. But if I have this, if I have that, then I matter to them and they should listen to me. If you can remember the days of your high school years, I think it's comical. Teenagers still have, the yearbooks or the annuals. And they spend their entire 4 years in high school trying to impress people that chances are 99% of them they're never going to talk to again, ever. And they sign in the back of the yearbook. They say, have a great summer. We're best friends forever. You're best friends till you get to 7th period and they find another friend. They're going to forget about you. But we feel like in those 4 years we have to prove ourselves in so many ways, and we even do that as adults. We think that we have to prove how valuable we are by the stuff that we have or the image that we carry. That is not the abundant life. The abundant life isn't worried about image or stuff. The abundant life allows us to live with nothing to prove. I want you to look what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4. Listen what he says about finding the right value in life. Paul says that God chose us in Him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in His sight. That is just one verse in a pretty confusing chapter, because the whole chapter is really talking about the great doctrine of predestination. I don't want to spend time on the doctrine of predestination this morning, although it's pretty easy to comprehend, and he explains it in verse 4 of Ephesians chapter 1. But in this one verse, an entire chapter about predestination, look at everything that Paul says about that has happened for us. Paul says that God chose us in Jesus. There's the Cliff Note version of how predestination works. There's not one elect group that you're either in or out and you can't do anything about it. Anybody can be part of the elect because we're chosen in Jesus. We're not chosen on our own. We're chosen in Jesus. So anyone who is in Jesus gets to be chosen. But Paul says that God chose us in Jesus. And not only did He choose us in Jesus, but He designed it that way before we were even born. Before we were even thought about by our parents. Before the creation of the world. Paul said God knew it was going to work this way. And Paul says, because you've been chosen in Jesus before the creation of the world, look at what you get to be. You get to be holy, and you get to be blameless in the sight of God. Can't tell you how many people just in 10 years of ministry have told me, there is no way in this world I will ever be holy. I will never be good enough. That's not what Paul says. Paul says if you're in Jesus, it's what you already are. You're holy. You're set apart. You are sanctified for a purpose. And he says you are blameless. I love that one. Because in our world today, we never want to take the blame for something. Someone else always has to be the culprit for the bad news. And we see it on TV in Washington. We hear it in the church. You know, it was not me. Let me tell you one of my favorite sons about my 7-year-old, Hayden. Back when we lived in Kerrville, which is where we lived before we moved to Wichita Falls, Hayden was about 3 or 4 years old, and he was taking swimming lessons down at the local YMCA one summer. And while he was having those swimming lessons at the YMCA, there was a big Baptist church in town, and they had a summer program, basically preschool/daycare, and the Baptist church would also use the YMCA pool the same time that Hayden was getting swimming lessons. And Hayden had these little pair of Croc shoes for 3 or 4-year-olds that he loved. And he would wear them to the pool, and he'd always take them off and then put them on the side of the pool. And I'd tell him every day, I'm like, Hayden, there's a lot of kids here. If you don't pick up your shoes, they're going to get lost. Somebody's going to take them. Well, he wouldn't listen to me. You know, he's 4. He probably won't listen to me his entire life. But he certainly didn't do it that day. Well, we finished his swimming lesson, and it was time to leave, and sure enough, his shoes were gone. And I'm sure what happened was that, you know, one of the teachers or chaperones from that preschool/daycare picked up Hayden's shoes, thinking they were someone else's shoes, and I said, buddy, you know, those people took your shoes. They didn't mean to, but they're gone. Well, he was heartbroken, started to cry, so we went down to Target and bought some more. Everything was fine until Sunday. Because when we got to church on Sunday, after church was over, I found out from the majority of the people at the church that he was going around and telling everybody in our congregation that the Baptist stole his shoes. I said, that's not what happened. You know, you're to blame for this. But if we're going to call them the Baptists, let's at least call them our Baptist friends, right? Our Baptist friends stole my shoes. We always want to point the blame to someone else when we deserve the blame. But Paul says, if you're in Jesus, even if it's your fault, God looks at you and says, you are blameless. The abundant life has nothing to prove because we know who we are. And when the world says, wait a minute, you aren't successful unless you drive the big car or have the big house or have all the money, Christians say that's not true. The reason we're successful is because we're in Jesus. Because Jesus has provided the abundant life. Secondly, with the abundant life, we are blessed to live with nothing to hide. Isn't it interesting that even though in the church we know that we're sinners, and even though everyone else knows that we're sinners, one of the things that we struggle with the most is confessing our sin. It's one of the great paradoxes of ministry. Sinners can't confess sin. Now, there are numerous reasons for that, and probably the greatest reason at the very top of the list is because we don't want other people to know what we've done. Right? We don't want it getting out, the bad things and the bad choices that we make. One of my favorite stories is about 4 preachers. They went on a camping trip one weekend just to get away from the stress and pressure of ministry, and they were sitting around the campfire one night, and one of the preachers spoke up and said, every week we get up in our pulpits and we tell our churches they need to confess our sin, but we don't confess our sin as preachers. Why don't we're all good friends, why don't we open up here around the campfire? And they said, okay. So the man that brought it up, he went first. He said, man, I hate to break this to y'all, but I've got a bad temper. I've got a real short fuse, and some days I'll just blow up at my wife and at my kids, and I hate that about myself. Second preacher spoke up and said, he said, don't be too hard on yourself. He said, I struggle with alcohol. He said, I come home from work, and there are some days just life is too much, and I don't just drink wine or even beer. I get the hard stuff. I get liquor, and I sit by myself in my living room after my kids and wife go to bed, and I drink almost every night. Third preacher spoke up. He said, you boys don't have anything on me. He said, I like to gamble. And some nights, late Thursday nights, before the weekend starts, but late Thursday night, maybe early Friday morning, I'll go down to the casino, and I just love to play the slots. I'm just there for hours. Fourth preacher spoke up. He said, I struggle with gossip. And I can't wait to get out of here and tell everybody what I just heard. When you're worried that your deepest secrets may get out, that makes confession a little bit more difficult. But confessing sin is one of the most powerful things we can ever do. James said in James 5:16 that confession, it saves us, it heals us. And Paul will say a similar thing about confessing our faith in Jesus in Romans chapter 10. But what's so crazy about this is that if we think that we don't need to confess our sins so no one else will know, we forget that someone already does know. The someone. It's what the writer of Hebrews is saying in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 13. When he says, nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare. Now, in that context, he's talking about the Word of God, and that's a pretty powerful statement about this book. In the verse before, he says this book's living, it's active, it can cut you to the core, but he also says this book exposes every bad thing in your life. And the way that works is people can hold up that book next to your life, and they can read this book, and they can say, Jacob's doing this or Jacob isn't doing this. And God can do the same thing since He wrote this book. But the statement is true. Somebody always knows about the sin in your life, even when you try to hide behind it. I want to show you a picture here. This is a picture of Hayden. He was 4, the same year that he lost his shoes at the swimming pool. But he wanted me to play hide and seek with him one day when I got home. See if you can find him in that picture. There he is. There's half of his body hanging out from that rug. And he thought, Dad will never find me here. But he was hiding in plain sight. I wonder sometimes if that's the way that we appear to God. And that's the way that we appear to the church when we know there's things wrong in our lives, and they know there's things wrong in our lives, and God knows there's something wrong in our life, but we just won't confess it. It's one of the great blessings of the abundant life is we are able to live with nothing to hide. And here's why. If you don't hear me say anything else today, I want you to hear this. The abundant life allows fault to be exposed because we know that forgiveness can be found. The abundant life allows fault to be exposed because we know that forgiveness can be found. I grew up at the Word of You Church in Richardson, Texas. It's where I spent the first 18 years of my life, where Robert Oglesby was their wonderful preacher for 53 years. Waterview did not have small groups on Sunday evenings as many congregations do, but they did have LOA groups that met once a month on Saturday evenings. And one Saturday evening, we had our LOA group, and it was at a house of a family friend of ours, and all of the parents were downstairs eating dinner and fellowshipping in the kitchen. All of the kids were upstairs, this big 2-story house in Dallas, and we were playing in the living room, game room upstairs, and all of the ladies' purses were in the guest room upstairs. Well, one of the kids that evening, we were all about 9, 10, 11 years old, they thought it'd be a pretty funny idea and good idea to go in there where all of the ladies' purses were and dump all of the purses out onto the floor into one big pile of stuff. You won't believe the things that women will or will not claim as theirs when other people are watching. You won't believe. If you have small groups at your house, try it sometime. See what happens. They don't want to confess in front of all these other people. That's mine. Or that belongs to me. No, that's not mine. I'm insulted that you would even insinuate that it would be. I'm so thankful that Jesus isn't that way with us. We don't have to live with something to hide. Because Jesus already knows the baggage that we're carrying. And here's the best part. He loves us anyway. He loves us anyway. Our fault can be exposed because forgiveness is found. I just wonder, what would our churches be like if we understood this? If we were more transparent? If we were more open about the problems in our life? I bet if we are to believe Scripture, church life would be a little bit more abundant. A little bit more full. Because we realize that we can live with nothing to hide. Last thing I want to mention is that with the abundant life, we are blessed to live with nothing to lose. As we've already said, our world places value on the wrong things, or at least things that don't matter. I'm sure you've heard this old joke before, but it's still worth telling about this very wealthy man. He was very materialistic, and he ordered for himself a brand new custom Mercedes from the Mercedes factory. And it wasn't just the regular Mercedes. It had a custom dash, had a custom stereo system, custom seats, custom wheels. I mean, it was a beautiful car. He was driving down the road one day and got into a head-on collision. And somehow, in that head-on collision, he bounced off the other car, and his car rolled down into the ditch. And somehow, in one way or another, he walked away from that accident and wasn't that hurt. But he was walking around his car, and the paramedics showed up, and he was saying, my Mercedes, my Mercedes. My dash, my stereo system, my seats, my wheels. And the paramedic said, man, stop worrying about your Mercedes. You're so worried about your car, you don't even realize that your right arm has fallen off. I mean, you lost your arm. It's laying there in the ditch. He looked down at his arm and he said, my Rolex, my Rolex. Do you know anybody like that? That they think if they lose the wrong thing, that their life is over. We place value in the wrong places, and I'm afraid that sometimes, even in the church, we begin to forget what's most important. In church, if we're truly living the abundant life that Jesus is talking about, we realize and we understand that we have a job to do. We have a job to do. And our job is to make and to grow disciples. That is our job. And so we need to spend all of our time and all of our energy and all of our focus on making disciples of Jesus, whatever it requires to do that. And yeah, there may be times that people don't listen. There may be times that we strike out. There may be times that we fall flat on our face, but that's okay if we go down trying. Because when we feel like we've hit rock bottom, the abundant life just rises us to the top. Do we understand? Do we understand that all of us are like people who have jumped out of an airplane without a parachute? Every single one of us is someone who has jumped out of an airplane without a parachute. As soon as we are born, we begin to die. James says in James chapter 4, verse 14, what is your life? You're a mist. You're here for a little while, and then you vanish. And we spend way too much time talking about what we're going to do tomorrow, and way too little time getting it done today. There are people all around us dying, and we're one of them. And our time is short. And the church needs to understand that the kingdom of God is here. We're not waiting for it to come. It is here right now. And so we need to take the risk that we need to take. We need to get back into the dreaming big business. We don't need to worry about whether or not we can always afford it, but we need to do our job. Because the money, it may run out eventually, but you know what else is going to run out? Time. Time to save souls. And if we go bankrupt trying, if we feel like we've failed, then at least we failed doing what's most important in life. The Apostle Paul phrased it this way, Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. He said, for me to live is Christ, but to die is gain. In other words, while I'm here on this earth, I'm going to give everything I have to Jesus, and it's going to be an honor serving Him. But even if that takes my life, even if I fail at that, it's no big deal, because I'm just getting promoted. I'm going to be with God. And church, we need to realize that with the abundant life, we have nothing to lose. People say, well, yeah, but our budgets might get tight. We may lose some money. Money's just a tool. Money's just a thing. We've got to get back into the dreaming big business. If you can hit that for me again, we've gone dead on the PowerPoint. Now, since I've told you three things that the abundant life is, I want to mention very quickly a couple of things that it's not, because we hear this very often in the religious world. It is not the health and wealth gospel. And a lot of TV preachers will use John 10:10 as their platform to prove that there is the health and wealth gospel. They will say, well, Jesus wants you to have fullness of life, so He wants you to have fullness of life in everything. He wants you to have a great job. He wants you to have great income. He wants you to have great health. He wants you to have great relationships with your family and friends. If that's true, if Jesus is talking about the health and wealth gospel in John 10:10, then He's promising us something that He Himself never experienced. Did Jesus have physical struggles in life? 40 days in the wilderness sounds pretty tough. Did Jesus have a lot of money? The majority of His ministry, He was homeless. So I'm going to go with a no on that one. Did Jesus have relationship issues? Were all of His relationships where they needed to be? Well, other than His mom, His entire family did not believe in Him till after He died. And His 11 closest friends ran away when He needed them the most. So I don't think Jesus is saying, I'm giving you abundant life in the sense that you're going to have a great income and great relationships. It's not what He's talking about. At the same time, we're kind of people of extremes. And so if we're not in this ditch, we get in the other ditch. Some people say that, well, the abundant life is all about heaven. It's not about life on earth right now. And so life here really isn't supposed to be fun for the Christian. We're supposed to be disciplined. We're supposed to be rigid. We can't enjoy ourselves. That's not right either. I grew up going to a bunch of Rangers games with my parents. We loved to go to the ballpark in Arlington. That's what it was called at that time. And I remember one afternoon game during the summer. We were sitting in right field, and there was a young boy in front of us about 6 or 7 years old, and he loved what he was experiencing. I mean, he was into the dot race. He was shouting charge. He was yelling his players' favorite names, the whole thing. And about the 8th inning, his mom, I guess, had enough, because he's shouting, he's yelling, and we're at this huge ballpark, and his mom says, Jimmy, use your inside voice. We're like, lady, we're at the ballpark in Arlington. We're outside. Let the kid have fun. Do you ever feel like churches are kind of that way? Use your inside voice. You follow Jesus. Have a frown on your face. Don't have too much fun. Let's not make worship too enjoyable. Let's not be too flashy. That's not what we're here for. And God certainly doesn't look down from heaven and say, I don't want you to have a good time. I created this entire world, and I even said it's good, but don't you enjoy it too much. That's not the abundant life. I think the abundant life is phrased in just one Jesus and one word. Though it is so simple, it is so profound. The abundant life is all about Jesus. Jesus came to rescue us from ourselves. But Jesus came so we could also enjoy ourselves. That's why he said, I've come that you may have life, and not just an existence. But I want you to have it to the full. I want you to have it abundantly. Friends, being a Christian is fun. Do we believe that? Being a Christian is fun. And we need to raise our children in our churches where they understand that following Jesus is fun. That coming to church on Sundays is fun. It should be the highlight of their week. That serving Jesus as a family, it's fun. That teaching people about the Lord and watching their lives be transformed, it's fun. We should never walk into our buildings on Sundays without a smile on our face. We should never have worship services that just feel dead and emotionless. Jesus says, I've given you the abundant life. And it's not just about heaven. It's also about what happens right here and right now. And our churches, our congregations, they will all face some very difficult times. There will be ups, there will be downs, there will be good seasons, there will be bad seasons, there will be times when we're growing, there will be times when we aren't growing. There will be times, many of you I'm sure are elders, when the people are happy. There will be times when the people aren't happy. But this is still a beautiful life. And there's only one reason why. And that's because of Jesus. I want to close with this. And then you're one of the lucky classes that's going to go to lunch early. You're welcome. It's hard to believe, but this year, this June, will mark 75 years since the historic day that our brave American forces stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. And on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, they did a documentary. And they interviewed 2 different soldiers who were there that day when America stormed those beaches. The first man was a soldier who actually rode on the boats up to the beach and stepped out of the beach and ran down the shore, looking up at the Nazi regime. And the first man said, as soon as I got out of the boat, the first thought that came to my mind was, there is no way that we're going to win. The second man they interviewed was not a soldier in the boat. He was a pilot. And his job was to fly above the main area of battle and to give cover fire and to drop bombs when they were needed on the Nazi regime. But the pilot said, as he was watching from above, as he flew around the area, the first thing that came to his mind was there's no way that we're going to lose. And that's a powerful reminder that the way that we see life determines our opinion of life. And too many times in the church, we're like those soldiers getting out of those boats, and we look up at the challenge before us, and we say there's no way that we're going to win. But God's watching down from heaven, and God sees the big picture. And God says, you've got it all wrong. If you're in my Son Jesus, there's no way that you're going to lose. Which way are you living? The abundant life watches from above. The worldly life watches from below. And may we be people who always live with nothing to prove and nothing to hide and nothing to lose. That's the abundant life.